John Kaveke, fashion designer, welcome to the JSO interview.
Thank you, John.
In a recently conducted survey, it appears that local designers are doing badly simply because there is a lack of information about them. Now, you being one, tell us about yourself.
Firstly, John, I'd like to say I'm a trained fashion designer, and I'm based in Nairobi, Kenya. And more so, I've had training both in Kenya and in Spain as a designer, and has had a background of being exposed to all sorts of different types of brands. And so I believe that being a designer, you have to be able to be exposed.
I want to go back to the personal in all this. You're based in Nairobi, Kenya. Tell us about growing up, because I want to find out what makes one decide to be a fashion designer. There must have been a lot of pressure against such a decision.
John, I would say, during my time when I was actually starting out, I started off being a designer. I trained in the early 90s. And that was not easy because in the early 90s, a profession like being a fashion designer was not considered a profession. And I remember the first time I mentioned to my parents that I'd like to be a fashion designer. Of course, the first thing they asked me, what is it? What's that? And ironically, there used to be a tailor just nearby where we stay. And my dad asked me a very simple and honest question. John, you want me to pay so much money for you to be like that gentleman downstairs there? It's impossible. And I had to explain to him a fashion designer and a tailor are two different things. First of all, I told him I cannot even employ the gentleman stitching because he has very basics of tailoring. So it was not easy starting out, but I think because of persistence and also wanting what I want, and I knew what I wanted as growing up.
So your childhood was spent very much in Nairobi. Are you a Nairobi lad?
No. Well, I grew up, I was born in Mombasa, so my early childhood was based in Mombasa, and I'm half Kamba and half Kikuyu.
Right.
And brought up in the coast. And then we moved to Nairobi, which now I spend most of my teens staying in Nairobi. And that's where I think I got exposed because my mom at the time had a sewing machine, which was a gift from my dad.
Right.
So I think I started observing what she used to do in the house, and my interest started to cultivate from there.
Right. So, and Spain is a formative country.
Yeah.
How long did the training in Spain take you?
Well, the training was supposed to be 4 years, but because I had gone to school when I already had experience, because I trained from early that's 1998 is when I started. I started my business as a fashion designer, but I went to Spain in 2005. Which means I'd practiced for a couple of years. So by the time I got there and I saw whatever we were studying was pretty much stuff I knew. And I asked them to give me a crash course because for me it was not important so much about the papers, it's the knowledge. So I did a 1-year program and it was amazing because they were very accommodating. And it was also a challenge because the classes were in Spanish.
Right, so you had to learn the language first.
Pretty much, yes.
Right.
Yeah, which was pretty interesting because the culture is different, but almost similar to what we have here.
I'm going to go back to the apprehension expressed by your father when he said, do you want to become like that tailor?
Yeah. And
put it on a national scale. Do you think that in a country where the figure is always being trundled about that 65% of the population live on less than $2 a day, is this the climate in which to seek a living as a fashion designer?
Well, John, I would say the trend has changed. I would say in comparison to when I started, basically you wouldn't have thought that it can actually translate to what we have now. People have started, wanting to spend money on clothes. And as much as, yes, the income is low, but people still find money to buy clothes because it's a necessity. You can't stay without clothes. And because of the way fashion is evolving and is moving very fast, people want to be fashionable. So people want to spend money. It's not exactly that it's easy. It's just that you just have to keep rubbing it in on people so that they can actually understand and appreciate what's locally produced.
Right, I'm going to go back and say define people, and I'm going to bring up the dread word mitumba.
Yes.
We live in a culture where people can
Yeah.
be dressed very elegantly,
Yeah.
thank you,
Yeah.
with designer labels. I can confront you here with my Yves Saint Laurent shirt,
Yes.
and it's sort of taken from the rack
Yeah.
in a mitumba
Yeah.
setting.
Yeah.
So this is the challenge. I myself
Yeah.
wear mitumba with great pride. So
See.
what's your response to me?
I think, John, I would look at it from 2 points. Me as an individual and me as a fashion designer. Me as an individual, I'd like to look at it because not everybody can afford a certain level of, in terms of buying a designer outfit from a designer, because we have different levels of how we create pieces, and of course we appeal for different clienteles. So I would say, because also for me, being a designer, I also wear mitumba, because there are certain things that I love about the mitumba that I cannot afford if I walked into a designer store. So I still agree it's part of us, and it's something
but
that
it's working against your marvelous plan to make a living out of fashion designing.
it is. I would
It's taking
say
away 60% of your clientele.
yes, and if you're still dealing, if you look at it from the point of percentages, yes, you're seeing it is higher, but look at it if the smaller percentage, the 35% that are actually buying into designer stuff, it's pretty a big market when you look at it from the population point of view.
Right, so you wouldn't go so far as to legislate if you were president. You wouldn't come and say, from tomorrow, second-hand imported clothes are no longer permissible in Kenya. You wouldn't go that far, because the argument is then that would kickstart a local clothing industry, because we would be obliged to go the way of India and other huge population markets where you can buy a shirt in India that looks very nice for very, very cheaply. Thank you.
John, I'll do it this way. I wouldn't abolish the mtumba. What I would abolish is imported clothes coming from places like China, because those are actually the direct competition, because mtumba is not our direct competition. It's necessary because we don't have a middle class. So you're either on the higher side or on the lower side. So the lower side, they have to be catered for in one way or another. And also those who actually buy mutumba, in the collection of items that they have as wardrobe, they do have stuff that they are made locally. I mean, you always have people who come and say, oh, I'd love to have at least one piece of your design. I cannot afford a lot of them, but I can buy at least one piece. So for us, that little effort is enough. You don't want to abolish it completely, because for me also, I get inspiration from Mtumba. I use Mtumba sometimes to understand how the Western cut and how they make clothes. What do they use that makes them more better than us?
Right, the Western cut was the word you mentioned. The accusation that we are simply aping the white man's ways, in the sense that if you find a coat such as the one that you're wearing, and you make it with, I don't know, made out of kitenge or of kikoi, then all of a sudden that becomes Kenyan fashion. But the whole of East Africa could do the same, and we could have a generic African brand that is continental. What makes you unique?
Well, John, I'd look at it from this point of view. The world is one. It's not very easy, and especially in Kenya, we don't have like an outfit that we can say this belongs to us, that we can use it as an inspiration. Because
there have been very many efforts to get a national dress, which so far failed. Maybe you're the one who hasn't come up one that we all want to wear.
Well, the effort was there.
Yes, okay, but the world is one. I'll come back to the national dress perhaps later, but you were saying the world is one, so nobody can make direct claim to a way of dressing. Everybody wears a suit.
Yeah, it's because also the way our lifestyles are. We tend to go to the offices, and of course, because it has been there, we were born into it, that people do wear like this, a certain way to the office, which I don't totally agree, because that worked for the environment from the Western world. Why can't we do our own style where we are more comfortable with what we wear? And that's what we design. And the other thing is also, yes, it's fine. You can actually wear a jacket that has a cut from a Western cut, but put an energy that is a little cultural, that reminds you of where you belong. other than just getting Roberto Cavalli and wearing it as is, why can't you get John Kaveke or someone else to